Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending this very quick, I want to say quick and dirty pre-bottling filtration webinar. Todd gave me, he said, you need to be done within half an hour. So I have to talk less and teach more in a very short amount of time. So very big thanks for your patience in advance. And I'm going to jump right in. He asked me to focus especially on small wineries because there are a lot of them, and it's not always easier to make small lots in a small facility than it is for bigger lots in a big facility. So you have many different things to consider when needing to decide how are you going to filter your wine in the cellar and how are you going to filter your wine for bottling. You've got so many options. You have to take into consideration the power, the wine loss, how much money do you have to spend on equipment and media, who's doing the labor, because some of us are more expensive than others. And then you've got all these different filters that you can have access to these days. So let's look at what equipment might you already have available and what are your options to upgrade. So you might be a small enough winery where you only have a cartridge filter for your main cellar filtrations as well as your final filtrations. And then you might expand to something like a sheet filter, or you may already have it, or you could look at the advantages of lenticular. If you're really fancy and large, you might consider crossflow. It just depends on all those things that you're deciding on. So when we look at a cartridge filter for a main depth filter, it's very easy to look at this and be like, this is great. The price is right. I can do everything with this filter. And my job is to point out its shortcomings as a main depth filter. So this is kind of how that mode of action works, right? So you have wine coming in on the one side, you have surface filtration, depth filtration, no adsorption capability or very limited adsorption capability. I'll show you about that here in a minute. But the nice thing is you can get a 30-inch cartridge housing and use 10-inch, 20-inch, or 30-inch media in here because it twists and locks into place. So this is just to show you this is really a plug that you would use in a multiple round housing to plug one or two positions. But for smaller than or less than 100-gallon batches, this is a great way to filter through different grades of media, say a 5 micron, then a 1 micron, then a half a micron. And then you can use that same membrane media in this housing to be able to sterile filter at the bottling line. So cellulose-based media versus cartridge filtration is main depth filter, and how come it has the small dirt holding capacity, and why does that matter? So when we look at this, method of depth filtration, you have surface filtration, depth, and adsorption. It's the three modes of how depth filtration works. And I've left some homework for you when you watch this link after the fact. This is a very good way that they've depicted. They call these things fancy names, not just surface filtration and depth filtration. They've got some interesting language there, but this is how it works. And when you have a 30-inch cartridge made of polypropylene, you don't have much of this in terms of charge. So you need to, take that into account. For larger than 100-gallon batches, you're going to have to start looking at a solid depth filter that's probably going to be cellulose-based or crossflow for larger volumes. So this is where I have to jump on the colloid horse and tell you about this unseen thing that is like a serial killer of filter media. Colloids they like to hang out like bubble gum, like in long chains, and they like to plug up your media, kind of like this one, which is called a beta-glucan, that is produced by botrytis and sometimes by rogue pediococcus bacteria during a malolactic fermentation. But you see this is an electron microscope of a clean PES surface area. And here is what happens when it gets inundated with glucans. It literally looks like bubble gum. And so this is a colloid that has to be preemptively treated because it takes 6 weeks for a glucanase enzyme to break these fibers down. So if you only find out that you're glucan positive at bottling, you're not going to have a very good bottling day. So here is a lot of writing about colloids and all the things that we know about them. The big culprits are things like sugars, the polysaccharides, protein, manoprotein, CMC, pectin is a very big one. So if you're making fruit wine or fruit hybrid wines, then you're dealing with them whether you like it or not. Their solubility changes in the presence of alcohol. It's kind of like being a teenager. 1 minute they're fine, the next minute you're like, what the hell just happened? And there wasn't even alcohol involved. But in this case, alcohol is very much involved and changes how they react and hang out. This is why it's so important to time your additions. None of this, just a little bit more sugar before we go to bottling. If you've already done your final cellar filtration and you add anything, even if you blend 2 wines together, this changes all of the solubility and how these guys show up and communicate with each other. So then all bets are off. So this is normally why we say running the wine through a cellulose-based depth filter in line with bottling, or within 20 to 24 hours before you bottle will help in most cases to keep them in this good hanging out situation. So timing is definitely important. And then I thought I'd just kind of on one page show you what you might be dealing with in a small winery situation. You might not have this one anymore, which most of us started out with in our garage, but you might have a nice pneumatic corker now that's not necessarily going to be a vacuum corker. You might have a 6-spout gravity filler, and you might have a satellite tank that you put at a higher height to be able to fill through this gravity filler. And then you will have to watch this really carefully because you're probably going to have to sterile filter from this tank through this cartridge to this filler. If you put this before this, and you look at these shipping containers, this ball valve here is normally totally gross and has all the biofilm in the world. So if you sterile filter through that, you're picking up all that biofilm again before going through your gravity filler. And then these things they never drain. You always have to have them at an angle. So just this is an example of a satellite tank to not use. There are much better ones, but normally the plastic tanks are, you need to clean them very well. They can be porous in some cases, and you don't want to just reinfect the wine after sterile filtering. So you would go from your tank through your filter to your gravity filler. I'm pointing these things out because my next slide is about sterile filtration principles and practices. And this is part of a much longer presentation, but this, like I say, is the quick and dirty version. So here is all about final filters. So we talked a little bit about depth cartridges. Looks the same. Can't really tell from the outside if it's a membrane or not, but a membrane filter has normally got a single membrane layer that might have supporting layers of other media. It's a very high precision, very accurate filter that you can test the integrity of, and that is an important thing that you have to do before and after. It has very low dirt holding capacity. So surface filtration is the only thing this cartridge has. It has really no depth or adsorption capacity in most cases. Examples are polyether sulfone, polyvinyl difluoride, and then some of the pre-filter nominal membrane medias like glass fiber and cellulose acetate that are really good pre-filters post cross-flow. And here is that picture of a multiple round housing where you could plug 1 or 2 positions if you don't need the speed for just one, and then you can grow into it, but don't fall into the trap where you buy this thinking it can be a depth filter, because This is going to be 300-gallon max before you're going to see those colloids just go right through. So this is final membrane filters. This is what they do. This is the surface. They did some coloring here just to show you these Enococcus bacteria on the surface and how they're retained. And that's what this filter does. It keeps those microorganisms from getting into the next steps of your bottling. And this is for bottle-ready wine only. You're not going to run something through this membrane that hasn't been pre-filtered properly. So how sterile is sterile when you're using a 0.45 micron membrane final filter? And this, it's important that you always choose a food and beverage grade filter, not one that was destined for filtering motor oil. You need to look at the retention or titer reduction rating. It needs to be 10 to the power of 7 per centimeter squared. Some people say these are 10 to the power of 9, but that's per 10 inch, that's fine. Not lower than this. And ask for the validation paperwork to prove the above and not just the percentage absolute rating. You need to buy the best filter that you can because you definitely get what you pay for. And buy, find a vendor that you like that can support the product and help you with troubleshooting and continuous improvement. This is going to become harder and harder over time, but it's good to have that relationship because when a membrane fails, it's awkward. So, find a source that can address this for you. When properly used, a membrane should last for a very long time, a very high volume. If you're not getting that throughput, it means that your pre-filtration needs a little bit of adjustment. And if you overwhelm your membrane, even the best one won't be able to retain them all. Sanitation and pre-filtration is going to be a big deal. And now a little bit about QC checks. There's things that we don't like to do because why? It's kind of important, and here is why. Before you start, you're going to clean your bottling line, your floors and your drains and everything that touches that area. Sanitizing is not cleaning. Just running some sanitizer over everything doesn't do anything unless that surface has been 100% cleaned before. And you're going to clean your bottling line. If it's a 6-spout filler, that's fine, but you're going to clean that separately from the housing, and that your filter goes in and not in one loop, because then you're just running it through and you're not going to do that with the filter in place, because then you're just filtering and retaining all that lovely biofilm. So that when the wine comes past again, they're like, yay, we're going to a very nice vacation destination. You're going to wet the filters by running water through the housings. And here is basically all the things that you're going to do, during and after. And this is really just how it doesn't matter how big a production facility you are. This is what everybody does. This one is important. If bottling line goes down for more than 30 minutes, and in some places it's more than 15 minutes, you have to push out the wine and you have to repeat steps 1 to 3 above. You can't just shut everything down and go to lunch and come back and take off like before, because in the meantime, all the lovely yeast and bacteria that has settled on things, they're now in your wine. This is important to integrity test before and after you sanitize and bottle to make sure that that filter stayed integral. These two obviously did not. Some finer lines. There's lots of writing because it is kind of important, but you want to make sure that you look at these, especially consider, using a pre-filter so that can take the load off your final membrane filter. Another thing to look at is just the things that is tedious to do, like measuring your dissolved oxygen and before and after bottling to make sure there wasn't a huge pickup. With a gravity filler, you're probably going to get more than in a automated monoblock. Packaging location is extremely important. You're not going to bottle in the same room or area where you're fermenting, because really that air should be filtered and should be free of airborne yeast and bacteria. So if it's not, then all bets are off. And this is what is tested for when you go to if you get a QC done by a third party. This is all the places that they find contamination on packaging lines, and it's basically everywhere. And it's especially the places that we don't see. Like, for example, this pre and final filter housing setup is not good because you see there's a dead leg here. That wine's never going to just stay full here. It's going to kind of wash, and then it's going to stay right there, and it might go up again and right here. So if you don't clean this properly, and you see all these unsanitary or non-sanitary valves, there's a lot of places here where things can go wrong. Pumps. This is the inside of a pump that has years and years of wine biofilm buildup. And as soon as the clean wine comes past here, it's just re-inoculating with all this loveliness. So make sure that the pump you're using is sanitary. And if not, like this one is designed for a dairy. The dairy people clean their pumps inside and out every time they use it. They take off the pump head, they clean it. Here, that didn't happen. So definitely pay attention to the area between the filter and the filler, especially those filler heads. So on a 6-spout gravity filler, you're not necessarily going to have something that you can take apart easily and clean properly. So that's a big consideration. So your active filtration or bottling hours is the time spent filtering or bottling minus the time to set up and sanitize and break down and clean. And remember, sanitizing is not cleaning. You cannot sanitize a dirty surface. So yes, you should clean your equipment periodically without media in there. This one is a very good example. This is a water filter housing, and you see that is the clean side of the filter, and it's not clean. This caused a major production facility to have recalls of many hundreds of pallets of wine, not because the wine wasn't filtered, but because the water filtration system hadn't been cleaned in such a long time, and this infected everything because this is what they used to rinse the bottling line. So a tiny little thing. Interesting question for you, especially with that 6-spout filler. Are you passivating your stainless steel equipment on a schedule? This is very important for 304 stainless steel equipment, and I have some reading material for you on this subject. But even the biggest wineries, they passivate their stainless steel equipment regardless of 304 or 316 on a schedule because of ions being released faster by 304 than 316. But that can lead to something that looks like rust, but it's not necessarily, but it can be. So another big one is how often are you testing your water? Water hardness is a very big killer of filter media. Also a very nice glue for biofilm to stick onto. So yeah, water is going to become more and more an issue. And then here is some homework because we don't have a lot of time. So all the links that you need, to check out what I just said, they are, like I said, this is one much shortened version of a longer, really webinar on sterile filtration considerations at bottling. So yeah, a lot to take in, a lot to read up on. I will be taking questions in when this actually gets released. So this is a pre-recorded session, but think about it, let me know, and we'll go from there. Thank you.